Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And the man himself, Mr. Michael Becker, is on another due diligence assignment. So unfortunately, we don't have him in, and he's given me the good word to tell everybody hello from Michael Becker. So hello to everybody who's listening, but he'll be back next week. So in the podcast today, we have a friend of ours that we've known for a long period of time that I think you'll learn a lot from him just for some of the challenges that he's been through, his property had gone through, and some of the things that he does is not only as an apartment owner, but also as an asset manager. So welcome to the podcast, Mr. Jack Langenberg. Jack, how are you?
I'm great, Paul. Good to talk to you today.
So, we've had you on in the past, but I think some of the knowledge nuggets that come from you are great because a lot of people, want to get into the apartment business. They want to kind of learn it. And so I think your travel down the road can actually help people, get them excited about getting into it to be successful. So Jack, if you can do me a favor, just give me a little bit of a background on you before we start asking you a bunch of questions. Tell me a little bit about, what's your background? Where do you come from?
Sure. So I've been a corporate executive for over 20 years, serving in roles as chief financial officer, chief operating officer, and even CEO. So I'm an operator by heart, but I also have the numbers background. I guess one other thing is I served as global head of mergers and acquisitions for a number of years for a Fortune 500 company. So buying companies, assessing them, and then integrating them, that's something that's kind of right up my alley.
Is there very much of a difference between buying companies versus buying apartments and trying to integrate apartments?
Well, there's a lot of similarities. Sure, there's the numbers and the actual asset, but it's really about people, whether you're talking about the people in the company or the people that live in the apartment complex, all the suppliers you work with. A lot of similarities there.
So again, your educational background, where are you
Sure.
from originally and where did you go to school?
Yeah, I grew up in Michigan, went to the University of Notre Dame, have a degree in business finance from there, as well as a degree in Japanese. And then konnichiwa. And I went to Harvard Business School after my several years in Japan.
Wow. And what was that like to go to Harvard Business School? I mean, you hear a lot of people getting executive MBAs or executive degrees from Harvard, but you're the one who actually went to Harvard to get a full business degree, right?
Yes, I was there for 2 years. I was a fellow from General Motors, so I was able to focus on, the studies. We went through studying about 500 different companies over the 2 years.
Wow.
In a host of different industries. Since I wasn't looking for a job afterward because I owed General Motors time, I was actually able to use my time as social chairman of my class. So I have 880 people that know me pretty well from that time of sponsoring all the fun parties. And they're also investors in my deals.
This is a kind of maybe a sidetrack question. I mean, everybody comes up and asks Paul, how do I raise money? Where do I find a list from? Should I go to the church? Should I go to my school? Should I go to the people I know around? In fact, I just got a call from a daughter of a guy that I know who just started a job today and sent a text wanting to know if I would want to change over my car insurance over to her, that company. So I guess sometimes you have to use friends and family to get you going. But tell me a little bit about you. I mean, what are some of your successful ways that you found in the past how to raise money?
Sure. Well, alumni associations are really powerful. You've generally made connections long ago with people, and you can tell them about what you're doing. I have a passion for this, so that usually comes out in the conversations. And at some point, people ask me, "Well, how would I get involved with that?" But even before I mention that I'm looking for potential investors in the future. So alumni associations are really a powerful way. Other types of networking events, even like the Old Capital events that you host, I always meet great people there that are looking to invest in deals.
Let's role play a little bit. Now, you and I just jumped on an elevator, and we're going up to the seventh floor. And I say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And we start a conversation. What are some of the things that you talk about just to somebody that's brand new, whether it's the elevator or the cocktail party? How do people hear your passion?
Sure. Well, I usually tell them that I, buy apartment complexes, fix them up, make them a better place to live for the residents, and work with the property management crew to make all that happen. And that's usually the thing that kicks it off. And then they maybe ask some questions, and we go from there.
What are some of the questions that folks usually ask you as the operator, and then how do you answer those questions? Can you give me at least one or possibly
Sure.
two questions that come up from the person on the other side of the elevator or the other person that has the corona in their hand?
Yeah, right. Sometimes they'll say, well, how do you find these apartment complexes? I mean, sure, you can drive around, but there's not going to be a for sale sign there. So,
Sure.
I talk to them about building, how I have to build relationships with brokers. And, that's probably the most important way to find them. Other questions that come up are people ask, how they can invest. And I go into the different options, whether it's through an LLC they might have or through their IRA or even just through their personal funds.
Do you bring up at that period of time, some of the tax benefits of owning multifamily properties?
Oh,
or is
definitely.
that down the road? I mean,
It depends. Sometimes people get right into that and they ask about, some people are very knowledgeable about this in terms of, passive investments and how you can, leverage the bonus depreciation across, different investments. So yeah, it kind of just steers in different directions depending on, the sort of the investment level the person has, the knowledge of that type of thing.
Should you have kind of an elevator pitch or a speech kind of written out in your head when people come up and talk to you a little bit about it? I mean, I don't like to talk very much without being somewhat prepared.
Right.
So some people that don't talk in front of groups don't know how to handle questions. But is there anything that maybe you've written down prior, some of these key bullet points, these 4 or 5 or 6 things that you bring up to them that again, you're trying to make a connection, but you're also trying to give them information. I guess you're trying to qualify to see if they would be good to be with you in the future to give you money.
Yes, I will typically start, just by talking about deals that I've invested in.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people want to hear something tangible. So I'll start talking about specific properties that I've invested in and what some of my outcomes were. I've been in this for, over 10 years. So I've got lots to talk about in that regard. But ultimately you are trying to find out, this is, type of person who would make sense for them to be investing in multifamily. The amount of money they have to invest is a sensitive topic, but usually you can kind of say, what the usual investment levels are of other investors. And then they'll light up if that's something that meets them, or they'll sort of back away if not. But, if somebody just has $5,000 to invest, it probably doesn't make sense for them to get involved,
So, yeah, we all have to start someplace, but
Mm-hmm.
5,000 may be just too low in some of the transactions that you're sponsoring.
Sure.
But what I'd love to do is kind of pick your brain a little bit, talking about, you as an owner, but also as an asset manager. There's a lot of people out there that are owners or landlords, but they put the asset management in the hands of somebody else, or they put it into also in the hands of a third-party property manager, or they're just limited partners. So can you kind of define what an asset manager does?
Certainly. Well, primarily the asset manager job is to maximize the value of the property over the hold period.
Yep.
And I do that by, focusing on increasing the net operating income. And there's a number of ways to do that, but you want to drive rents up. And to do that, often you need to upgrade the property in terms of the interiors and reposition it. But the asset manager's job also includes, typically working with a third-party property management company or self-managing. I prefer professional third-party property management. And then, there's a bit of analysis of financials and performance metrics, that we keep track of. and, working with a host of other parties involved, whether it's the city with inspections that come up, the lender, but also with investors, and making sure, one's communicating with them so they understand what's going on with the property. I guess to summarize, after the deal is closed, it's really about, monthly and weekly and daily performance, and, working with the team there to drive that.
Let me ask you a few questions that you touched upon in your answer to that. Overseeing the third-party property management company, do you work with only just one on the assets that you asset manage? You just work with one third-party property management company, and then, or do you have a couple of third-party property management companies? Like you have like 2 over here or 5 over there, type of stuff.
Sure.
And how do you make a decision what the best third-party property management company is?
Sure. I think there's synergies for working with one, if one could, but not all of them have the same type of geographic coverage as maybe as my portfolio would have. So I've worked with several different property management companies, only one at a time. So, for a given property, you've got one property manager and one, property management company that they work for. But, I kind of set up my communication process with them, starting right from, even when we're sourcing deals, I like to get their take on it, because they've got expertise. Often they're managing properties nearby, so they can give really great insights even up front. So I have relationships with several property management companies, and pick them based on the type of asset. An A-class property manager might be a little bit different than, say, C-class property management company. And finding the right one for the asset is really important.
So you're always solving problems out on properties, because that's kind of you're the go-to person that on the asset management side, you're the go-to person that's actually doing that type of stuff. Are you walking the property on a weekly basis, monthly basis? I mean, how much time, say per property, are you physically on the property? What should folks in this in the asset management position think that they should be at?
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of property or asset managers that really don't go to the properties very often. I'm a very hands-on person. It's all the way back to my corporate training with, branch style, business where we would visit branches. So I very much want to get on the property. I would say it's never less than quarterly. And depending on, what's going on, like in the early stage of getting the property taken over and CapEx going, that could be, a couple times a week even. So it really depends on the stage of the property. But, let's say that, takeovers happen. We've got our CapEx rolling, probably quarterly at that point. But, with Zoom and all that these days, we do have weekly calls. So I'm in touch with, even the on-site team every week.
And how about vendors? Are you part of the solution team, talking to the folks that cut your grass, establish the electrical billing contract for the utilities? Tell us a little bit about how deep do you go with the vendor contracts that every property has, whether it is a cable bill or, security bill on the property, whether, what all these different billing systems that come up.
Certainly. I would say the smaller the contract, the less likely I'm involved, but I do like to have my property management company get 3 quotes when we're picking vendors. But if you're talking about, a construction company that's going to be doing, $1 million of rehab, I'm absolutely involved, and, probably on weekly calls with them that might even be separate from the property management company calls that we have. We want to make sure we hit those, milestones, because, time is money. So, but yeah, the city setting up, going in and actually just meeting the people that are in the city, the inspection department, utilities department. Sometimes I get involved with that. If the property management company has really great expertise in that, I'll let them have the reins. But, I assume I own it all. The buck stops with me until, we get things set up and things are running smoothly.
Communication is such a big deal, not only to your investors, but also to the city itself and all the officer that patrols your neighborhood. Are you getting out and meeting the inspectors, and you meeting the public safety officer? And are you out there trying to figure out, who do you need to call in case something happens?
Right. Yes, I definitely have met the inspectors many times. In fact, helped change the relationship with them. I mean, the reports and write-ups that we get sometimes early on a property when the previous owner maybe didn't have those type of approaches, long lengthy reports, lots of money to fix the property, but that's definitely cut down quite a bit as we form a relationship with them and deliver on what we promise.
Yeah, you had a property that you walked into that had probably piss poor relationship with the city, and you were able to turn that thing around 180 degrees. So can you walk us through a little bit about how do you solve a problem when someone comes in with a chip on their shoulder?
Yes. Yeah, we had a pesky inspector at the property you're talking about. When we took it over, there was, I don't know, the write-up was probably 20 pages long. And, we sat down with them and kind of prioritized the items, set up a timeline for when we would get them done. And, by delivering on that, we were already aware of this because of our due diligence. We didn't just, walk into it. We knew that was actually what created such a good opportunity in terms of the pricing on that asset. But so, we met the inspector out there several times for his, walks and reports. And then when we would have him come back out to inspect the work that was done, I made sure to show up for those meetings as well, because I felt like I could steer the conversation to his concerns and address them probably better than our on-site property manager, who was a kid in his 20s.
So, everything is about communication. You were able to turn that relationship around. It took you 6 months until they bought into the idea that you were a different operator than the previous one. But, communication with your vendors is also important too, but communication with your investors is probably the biggest one. So tell us a little bit about how much time do you give to your investors? Do you send out information to your partners on a monthly, quarterly basis? Give me kind of a high level.
Sure. I prefer, and for my deals, I send it out on a monthly basis, the update. And that update comprises the financial statements that I receive from the property management company and also the write-up. I like to have a little bit of a discussion in there so that they can follow along with operational items that we're dealing with, as well as, some words about the financials, about where we are versus budget, where we are versus, say prior month, T12, that type of thing. That works really well because when people can read that, then they're less likely to need to call to, get their question answered. But all my investors have my number. They can get a hold of me. And occasionally we have some calls. Actually, a lot of people have good ideas. So I like hearing from people as well.
What is in the third-party property management data box that you push over to your investors? Give me just on a high level. If you were just skimming, if someone was just skimming through it, they didn't have it in front of them. Like in this podcast, people have to be visual what we're talking about. What things do you have in your information doc box?
Sure. I just prepared and sent one out today, so it's fresh in my mind. The rent roll is one, the income statement, both the one that's just for the month with the prior year variance, the budget variance, the year-to-date amounts, a T12 for the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and some other reports, whether it's bad debt or things that may be that I might mention in the report. Full set.
All right. And then everyone is always excited about key performance indicators, KPIs. What type of information are you looking for as an asset manager that would probably be helpful to newbies out there or investors? What should they be looking at?
Sure. Well, I love KPIs. That comes from my corporate America training. But, a lot of people look at physical occupancy and that really only scratches the surface. I think, knowing what's going on with leasing in terms of how quickly units are being turned and made ready, how one is doing with renewals. Renewals is a big thing for me because if you don't have to, turn the property, it saves you on make-ready costs. But, renewals should be above 50%. I kind of like them to be, between 2/3 and 3/4. And that's been our trend, is about 75% on the renewals. In addition to that, though, when you have a lease end, there's a metric called the lease trade out. And that's a really important metric because you're learning how well you're doing with respect to staying with the market on what you're charging for your residents. So, the lease trade out could be a renewal. And did you actually add additional, rent, to the new contract with the resident? We definitely like to be doing that, and we do a lot of comp studies for that. But also, when somebody moves out, then you have that same unit being leased to a new person or a new family, and how are you doing with rents on that? So we pay a lot of attention to that. There's a host of other metrics, expense ratios and collection metrics. Those were very important during COVID, obviously with some of the challenges everyone had during that time.
Now, KPIs are good on something like that, but what are some of the things that you're focusing in on, for expenses?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, we're trying to, I guess, lower the expenses as much as possible. What's your take right now at expenses? Are you, how difficult is it to hire people? What are we paying employees right now? What are we paying a maintenance person? What are we paying somebody that's sitting in the front desk? Give me kind of an idea, and where are you getting these people from?
Sure. Well, we're paying a lot more than we used to. It's definitely, a labor crunch right now. I would say, a good on-site property manager is going to cost you, somewhere between $40,000 and $50-something thousand a year. That could include incentives, which I'm a huge fan of, is putting in place, some variable comp that's really tied to, the outcomes I'm trying to drive. Maintenance leads, it depends on what their skill set is. I'm blessed to always be trying to find, or not blessed, but I'm always trying to find somebody that's got some certifications and things that really matter. Like, are they electrical certified or maybe plumbing certified? They're going to cost you a little bit more, but they're definitely worth it if you can, get somebody to, be your lead maintenance guy that's got a plumbing background. Yeah.
Have you found people, are you starting to do some of this off-site, done maybe in the Philippines or done in Mexico to kind of help push the expenses a little bit lower and let them do some of the work?
Yes. Well, our good friend JC's got that business going that on the property management side. I'm really intrigued with how he's, using automation and outsourcing to bring down the cost of some of the functions, taking some of the burden off the leasing team by automating some of that front end contact stuff that often doesn't go anywhere, but also even on the maintenance side. I mean, those are definitely some creative things. And with my background with call centers and such, I'm very eager to, explore that as I scale.
Sure. What discussions do you typically have with the property management company? Are you talking to them once a week, once a month? I mean, I know you're a hands-on type of guy, and I think everyone wants to be a hands-on type of guy, but tell me a little bit about your discussions and what that entails.
Sure. It's really important right from the beginning to involve them and meet and understand their org chart, their internal org chart. Who's responsible at the top level for the maintenance arm. If there's a construction arm, who's that? Who runs the operations teams? And know how their regional and area manager structure works so that you go to the right person. But I really like to set that relationship up strongly even before I buy a property because I want their input on it. But let's say once we've got the deal closed, definitely more involvement up front helps because you set the expectation for them. I believe in the phrase you inspect what you expect. So initially, there's more on-site visits, building that relationship with them, lunches, take a property management on-site and leasing or maintenance personnel to lunch. It doesn't have to be weekly, monthly, or anything like that, but even a couple times over a hold period really makes a difference. But I have, as I was mentioning, I have weekly calls. In the beginning, they could take an hour, but my on-site at Oasis Springs that we're selling, we have a call that lasts maybe 10 minutes. And I don't have to ask him any questions now because over the time I've trained him, how to focus in on the KPIs, talk through the problems. He talks about what solutions he's got. And my question usually to him at the end is, Jose, what do you need from me, to make you more successful? So it's really about, a lot of communication up front, setting expectations. And once, they've got those expectations, they either live up to them or you have to make a change. I mentioned Jose, he's the third, on-site property manager we had at that property. We did have to, move through a couple because, they weren't delivering on, what we'd all agreed to.
So, you are responsible back to the partnership about, the bills that the management company pays or does not pay. What you hire property management for is probably their accounting systems not only do they bring in the personnel to operate your property, but you also want to make sure that they are paying your bills, whether it's your mortgage or it's paying your employees or paying the water bill, the roof bill. But sometimes, I'm always concerned about, say one management company is not paying your bill, but they're paying somebody else's bill with your money type of stuff.
Yep. Oh, yes.
How do you deal with that?
Sure. Well, to look and make sure bills are getting paid, I look at the unpaid invoices report as well as the AP aging report. Those are two, helpful reports. I just quickly glance at them. Sometimes you're going to see some AP aging out there because maybe the contractor hasn't completed the job yet, but that generally that's pretty straightforward. But mistakes do happen, and like you were mentioning mistakes. I caught a $15,000 mistake on the financial review that I do. This is a couple of years back, but it was a line item in the utilities section in the profit and loss statement. It was way over budget and way over the previous months when I looked at the T12. So I jump into the general ledger, which sounds like a scary accounting report, but it's just a long list organized by account numbers. And that told the story. In the utilities section, I found electric bills for an unrelated property, one that wasn't even in my portfolio. But anyway, I copied and pasted the screenshots and sent it to the accounting people at the property management company, and they got it taken care of. Mistakes do happen, and I know a lot of people they breathe fire when that happens, but that doesn't really work to keep the back office of the property management company working for you as strongly as they could. Little honey goes a long way.
Jack, you have lots of honey, baby. You got lots of honey. So you're not the person that has a template, but you certainly have ideas on how to get into multifamily. So tell us a little bit about how did you go from being a corporate employee and then to transitioning into ownership apartments and being an asset manager. Tell us a little bit about your journey here.
Certainly. So, over 10 years ago, I started as a passive investor. I'm a limited partner right now. I think in about 12 deals, over 3,000 doors. And there's some other ones that have gone full cycle. But I learned from the people I invested with, one being Michael Becker. There's several other people I've invested with. And I watched and learned from the reports that they sent out and how they handled different problems that came up. And at one point I thought, gosh, I think I'd kind of like to do this. It really dovetailed with my background. And, back in 2018, I started sponsoring deals.
Tell me a little bit about maybe some of the deals, or at least one of the deals that you did not, you don't have to mention any names.
Yeah, sure.
That you did not like their communication skills that they had that you thought was probably pretty piss poor. What did they do? Sure.
Yeah, I would say, not even having regular monthly reports coming out was an issue with one, place I invested in. And I actually applied pressure on that. And, they did start doing monthly reports, but, I think it was more of, they were passive sponsors. They thought that the property management company would do everything for them. And that's just not what was happening. So I think you have to be an active, asset manager and staff appropriately for how many properties you have.
And I agree that probably is one of the best ways of getting into multifamily ownership and becoming an asset manager is investing in other people's deals to kind of determine about what you like and what you don't like. And when you have the opportunity to step in from the back of the airplane to the front of the airplane and become the captain of the airplane, is that then you have some experience level and a platform that you've seen how other people have done it, whether you like it or you don't, that you want to do it your way. Tell us a little bit about it. You're selling a deal right now. I'd like to kind of understand a little bit about, how did you find that deal? How did you finance that deal? What did you like about the deal? What you didn't like about the deal? Tell me a little bit about just one of the deals, and I just happened to bring this one up.
Sure. Yeah. So we were under contract to sell Oasis Springs. It'll happen later this month. I became aware of that property through my partner on that, Tom Lafferty. He was looking for someone to work with on it and jump into that deal right at the beginning. We were working with Old Capital Lending to finance it. We had Fannie Mae financing on it, which was great. The interesting parts were in the beginning. We had to delay closing a little bit because the previous operator was having some challenges. When we took it over, it was an assumption. And, a month into it, we'd taken the occupancy from, 90 something down to 72%. And the bank calls and says, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, you've had the asset for 3 years. You have a lot of people living there that aren't paying. So we got rid of them." And within 6 months, we were back in the 90% in terms of occupancy. Haven't been down below that ever since, even during COVID. We took the NOI from 572,000 in the trailing 12. It'll be over 900,000 by the end of this month. So that's a 58% increase in NOI. If we had photographs here, I could show you some of the pictures of the rehab we did, but it was, we had foundation things. We had to take down bricks off a wall. We had to, we had a pretty heavy lift on some of the aspects of this deal, but it all worked out like we were hoping. I'm never satisfied though. I wish we would have done a little faster, like an extra 30 or 60 days faster. But anyway, wow. It's in great shape.
Now, again, past performance is no indication of future returns, but you bought it at X, you're selling it at Y. Are people walking away with big smiles on their face on this deal?
Yes, they are. Yeah, we're going to deliver triple-digit returns to our investors, and looking forward to working with them in the future.
That's great. We talked about a lot of challenges, and the pandemic was a huge challenge for a lot of operators, asset managers of properties. Tell me a little bit about what you did and some of the solutions that, of all people, your son kind of helped. And by the way, congratulations to your son who just entered this week into the U.S. Air Force Academy as a brand new incoming cadet.
Yes.
So congratulations to you on having an Air Force guy. That's great. Good.
Yeah.
Congratulations. But one of the things is that what did Nick do to help you?
Yeah, sure. Well, pre-COVID, if a resident didn't pay rent, we evicted them.
Right.
There was really only one play in the playbook. And, when COVID hit, many residents, good long-term paying residents, they lost their jobs. And then in addition to that, the government put in place, the eviction moratorium. So we had to get creative. I'm not going to just let the bank take my property 6 months later after we blow through, the cash we had in the bank. So, back in April of 2020, I asked my son, Nick, who, he was a high schooler at the time, a junior, thinking about what am I going to put on my college applications for helping the world, because that matters. So I asked him to find some charities and nonprofit agencies that might help the residents pay their rent. And I didn't know how hard he was going to go at it, but he kind of blew me away with his effort. He found about 20 charities. And then, once he had this list from, he just Googled them and that type of thing. But I said, well, Nick, now I want you to call him. So he said, well, what do you want me to ask him? I said, well, I want the requirements, the instructions. And I knew I wasn't quite getting, through to him. So I said, I want the chocolate chip cookie recipe on how to get the money to the residents. And the light bulb kind of came on for him at that point. And, he made a nice set of instructions, like you would just, mix the flour, mix the brown sugar, et cetera. But it was, that you need this form and that form, and the resident needs to provide it to such and such agency. Here's their email, here's their phone number. So he wrote out a really nice set of instructions. And then he and I and property manager, we went and had wings and Nick explained it to him, and property manager, who's pretty busy, the on-site. They're busy with so many things. He didn't have time to do all that type of research, but he used that, and we helped probably over 50 residents, receive some aid for anywhere from 1 to 3 months. It was a really big win, and Nick really helped out in it.
And you shared that information with other property owners, kind of in your circle.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So Nick checked the box on sort of like charity and helping community. And I said, well, Nick, what about a leadership opportunity with this? He's like, what do you mean? Well, I was an investor in many passive, as a passive investor in many deals. I know the operators. We all trade stories and learn from each other. So I offered them up, his friend set to do the research. So, when people, answer, heck yes, I want that information, So he organized a group of friends. They dialed for dollars, so to speak, and made a bunch of chocolate chip cookie recipes. It's really, kind of dependent on the geography, at least back in April of last year it was. So Tarrant County, the city of Hearst, local Catholic charities, that type of thing. So I had, friends and, they have deals in Lubbock and Dallas, Garland, other places. So they prepared that research for them and, helped a lot of people.
And that was before the
TRR.
before they came in
Sure.
to help.
Yeah, so the charities, they're kind of tough to work with because they're volunteers. So, getting the money in, that was a little bit frustrating, but it was still worth it. I mean, I think we generated, $80,000 to $100,000 of cash flow at one property just by working with the charities. Now, TRR, that's a lot more organized now. And
what does TRR stand for?
Oh, sure, yeah, Texas Rent Relief. So there's, more than $1 billion, available for landlords to help their residents. And there's a process, it's a pretty well-run program, but we've really been generating a lot of cash flow from that for even back rents, which, that's a dicey thing. How long do you want to hold on, to a relationship with a resident? You might like them and all that, but if they're, 3-4 months into you, and they filled out TRR and the money hasn't come in yet, you start to get a little nervous. But fortunately, that's all clearing out now, the backlog.
Well, that's great of the help that your son, Nick, did for you. If he was an Eagle Scout, he would be getting the Eagle Scout badge. So good.
Yes.
Good for him. Hey, let's just finish this off a little bit about underwriting new deals and maybe the magic of selling a deal. You mentioned you're selling a deal. Maybe you could give us underwriting deals and some nuggets on since you're in the position that you're selling a deal. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit about what you saw?
Yes. So, we worked with a broker, the same ones that we worked with to buy the property. They were great. They ran a wonderful process in terms of bringing, I think there were, 20 to 30 tours. We had, more than 15 make best and final. We had 4 very qualified buyers for the seller interviews, that we interviewed them and understand what their business plan is and how likely they are to close. So we're sort of in the home stretches there with that. And it's pretty exciting to be able to return, everyone's initial investment and then a lot more.
So walk us through a little bit about selling a deal. And now you mentioned a couple of things. You bought it from one group, and then you brought it back to that same group. Is that kind of typical? Is that industry knowledge that's something they usually do? Is you bring it back to the person who sold it to you?
I think that's pretty common. You do build a relationship with them. I think that different operators handle it different ways, but I really like the Marcus and Millichap shop. They did a great job with it, and I would definitely recommend them.
And then you guys did a best and final, and then another best and final these days.
Yes.
For the period of time that you guys started marketing that deal to the time that someone signed the LOI, how long of a time was that, and what can people expect?
Yeah, we had the first conversations, with Alan Ford just before the freeze. So that put a lot of pressure on me to deal with, getting all that stuff fixed. But we had the tours starting in April, and by early May, we had selected a new buyer and had a PSA in place within a week. It's pretty fast. That's the thing about this business is it moves at a very fast pace. So you can't be sitting around if you want to buy a property. You really have to, be on it.
Is this a market where you required hard money up front in the deals from the buyers?
Yeah, we had, everyone had hard money in their offers. I think we ended up with $400,000 or $500,000 of hard money in the final deal.
And that's usually not even a pushback on something like that, right?
It's a way that people can distinguish themselves to really show, hey, look, I know I don't have any way out of getting this money back. So I'm serious. I've already done a lot of my work up front. I mean, you really have to do work up front.
Sure.
I mean, even buying deals, I underwrite a lot. You'd ask me about, underwriting, but I verify what the taxes are going to be to the extent possible. And on a recent deal I won, I have relationships with a, property protest company. And I think my underwriting was probably $80,000 more favorable on an annual basis than many because, the information I gleaned on that. I have relationships with the property insurers. That's a big, line item, and it's growing a lot. And being part of, having access to that type of information is important. Having good relationships with lender. I mean, not just the lender, but I mean the property management company, and getting their insights into what you can do with rents and different levels of rehab. Somebody that's an operator in the property management side, you walk the property with them, they're going to have some really good insights to share. And all that has to happen before you put in, your maybe not your LOI, but your, you're not your first offer, but by the time you get to best and final, if you haven't done that, you're either taking a giant risk for not knowing the answers, or you're just going to be out of the game because you haven't sharpened your pencil enough.
talk a little bit about this. I know that you've raised all the equity for this transaction you're closing, but you were awarded this transaction, but there was a lot of people that were trying to get that deal. And what did the seller do that you told me that I thought was interesting to check you guys out?
Yeah. So back in my global M&A days, for the Fortune 500 company, Kelly Services, I would go all over the world and buy companies. And I became known as the founder whisperer. So I would meet these people that founded these companies in different countries, also in the US. But I think it's important to know the seller motivation. And this particular property is owned by two sisters. Their father actually built it, 50 years ago. And I wanted to understand some of the concerns they had. And they really are attached, to the property. They care about what happens to the employees and the residents. So I learned that information partly from the brokers, but also just some research I did. And, when we talked to them during the seller interview, we highlighted some of the things that they would care about. I even invited them to visit Oasis Springs, which happened to only be about 8 miles away, similar size property. And they actually did that. They went to that property, and they also went to a couple of the other, I don't know which other properties they were, but other interested buyers. And that became part of their decision process. So, just knowing those kind of motivations, what they care about. I knew the name of their on-site property manager. I mentioned her by name during the seller interview. And that also matters, if you take the time to get to know who their staff are, if they care about them, possibly offer them a job. We'll probably do that. She's quite capable. So anyway, some of those kind of things really matter.
They certainly do. I mean, when you get in the best and the final, and then the seller asks to do a phone call, visit with the 2 or 3 or 4 potential buyers, you better have your act together, and then you've done some research on the property that you're buying, and then don't turn it around for you to be the interrogator. You should be the one that has the answers to help the decision maker find you pleasant, straightforward, direct, to make sure that you're a qualified buyer of their asset. In this case, Jack found out some of their hot buttons that they liked. I'm not saying he played to them, but he did, and he was awarded with the deal. I mean, you've seen it 100 times where people on single family transactions have written the letter that goes along with their potential contract to the seller. I want this house so I can raise my family just like how you did, and I have a pretty little white dog that's going to find this house fantastic like how you did. And then, hopefully my daughter grows up and she can walk down the stairs. So, emotion plays to people's heartstrings. And, Jack kind of figured that out quickly, and hopefully you could figure that out. Any more words of wisdom, Jack, that people that are thinking about getting the multifamily or want to be an asset manager or thinking about making that transition from corporate America into multifamily, any last minute words of advice?
Sure. Well, I love it. You have to have a passion for it. I think that you'll know if you do or don't. But if you do, that'll help you to put the hours in the evenings, on the weekends. I'd say I work harder than when I worked for the man, even though I was the man.
And now you are the man.
Yeah.
So that's great. If people want to get more information about Jack Langenberg or just build some interest with Jack, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Jack?
Sure. It's I think email is probably the best way to start. It's jacklangenberg@gmail.com, jacklangenberg@gmail.com.
That's great. Some great information that came out of Jack Langenberg. Jack and I have known each other for a long period of time. I find him a good and capable operator, smart guy. You definitely want to build a relationship with Jack. If you're thinking about getting the multifamily, bend his ear a little bit. He'll be love to hear from you. And so that's great. Again, if you are thinking about getting the multifamily, the place to go, Old Capital Conference in September 22nd, 23rd at the Ranger Stadium, Globe Life Park, where the Texas Rangers play. You won't be looking down on the field. You will be on the field on September 22nd, 23rd. September 22nd, we'll have a little party next door. at Texas Live, and then we'll play ball on September 23rd. You want to go to the oldcapitalconference.com website, and you want to reserve your ticket. So make sure you come to Texas. You'll meet Jack Langenberg, hopefully in Texas.
I'll be there
at that event. There'll probably be 700, 750 of multifamily owners, investors throughout the nation coming to see everyone and meet everybody. So bring a bunch of business cards and get to know people that are actually doing it, like Jack Langenberg. Again, I'm Paul Peebles. We appreciate you spending some time with us. Jack Langenberg, always a pleasure. Everyone, have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.